Welcome to Lift Up Your Hearts podcast. This is a podcast where we reflect on the scriptures from this coming Sunday and sometimes other scriptures to receive God's love for us, that we can meditate and contemplate and use our imagination to receive His love and His understanding so that we can take these prayers and reflect on them throughout our week, and we can grow in our relationship with Jesus. This week we have a special guest that I've been promising and hoping and all those things, that my wife is here with us this week, so please be generous and gracious to her. This is hopefully to show that this type of imaginative contemplation can be done by anyone. She is not currently a podcast listener, but I think she follows me on some of the apps, I think, right?
Yep.
Okay, great. So this is hopefully to help anyone who has not entered into this to see that it's not impossible. There's no right or wrong way to do it. This is not a Bible study. This is not a homily. This is our own reflections to receive God's love for us and to enter into that relationship with Him. As Father Gallagher said, sometimes this is kind of like looking for our best friend, and we know he's in the neighborhood, and we just start to walk down and knock on the doors of the houses, and sometimes we find him at the first house, sometimes we find him at the fifth house, sometimes we find him at the 10th house. But when we find him, just like when we read through the scriptures and something strikes us, when we find him, when we find that thing that kind of struck us or resonates with us or we're curious about, then we stay there and rest for a while. We stay with our friend. We stay with the Lord. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. There's no right or wrong answers, but we're going to enter into it the same way. So when we first enter into this, as we remember what prayer is, St. John Damascene says it, and it's repeated in our catechism. It is a raising of our hearts and our minds to the Lord. So St. Ignatius asks us to take a deep breath, try to concentrate just on this, to let all the anxieties and troubles of our day wash away. And for the moment of an Our Father, we're meant to contemplate how the Lord looks upon us with love. Again, a reminder, this is not to mentally wrestle with whether the Lord looks upon us with love or not, but this is a statement that He does indeed look on us with love, and to try to imagine that and what that feels like and let that wash over us. And I say intentionally let it wash over us because when we feel the washing of water over our heads, it encompasses everything and it blocks out everything else. All we hear is the rushing water over our ears and over our head, especially if we're in like a waterfall. We can feel this intense washing over us. So allow this meditation to wash over us as we enter into the prayer, to contemplate how the Lord looks upon us with love. And as we enter into this time of prayer, we can ask for a grace. And this week is going to be the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. Now, this first time I read it through, we're gonna try to enter into this setting. So in order to help us, I read a little bit before and a little bit after this passage to kind of give us a picture. This wasn't what we read last week, the right before. This is kind of it seems to be a little bit of a Jesus telling his disciples that he's going to go to Jerusalem and die. He's predicted his passion for the first and second time already. And so the disciples are asking some questions about it. We remember Peter's first question, Lord, he takes him aside and says, Lord, this can't happen. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Your ways are not my ways. And then right before this passage, Jesus asks, like, what's this gonna mean for us? What is this gonna mean for us when we enter into eternity? Are we gonna be, what about us who have sacrificed everything? And Jesus says, you'll be given 100-fold in the kingdom to come. And then also right following this, so there's like this kind of sandwich of the disciples asking the Lord, for kind of favors in some way. We hear John and James, the sons of thunder, asking their mom if they can sit on his right and his left. And then so Jesus this is like this sandwich in between it. Jesus tells us a parable. So the first time I read it through, allow it to kind of wash over you. Try to start to picture, we're hearing just a parable this week, so there's not like a lot of action. So one option is to kind of enter into being one of the disciples and just listening to Jesus tell this parable and how it strikes us and what is on our heart right now and how we hear it and how does Jesus look when he's saying it to us? Are there certain inflections that he has? Are there certain things that strike us? Are there certain memories that come up? The other option is to kind of enter into it as one of the characters in the parable. We can be, any of the characters. We can be the landowner. We can be some of the workers, and to enter into that. So allow some of those imaginations to start to work as I read it through the first time. Jesus told his disciples this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with them for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Going out about 9 o'clock, the landowner saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You too go into my vineyard, and I will give you what is just." So they went off. And he went out again around noon and around 3 o'clock, and did likewise. Going out about 5 o'clock, the landowner found others standing around, and said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They answered, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You too go into my vineyard." When it was evening, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Summon the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and ending with the first." When those who had started about 5 o'clock came, each received a usual daily wage. So when the first came, they thought that they would receive more. But each of them also got the usual wage. And on receiving it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who bore the day's burden and the heat." He said to one of them in reply, "My friend, I am not cheating you. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give this last one the same as you? Or am I not free to do as I wish with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous? Thus the last will be first, and the first will be last." One of the first things I think that struck out to me was that he made an agreement with them at the beginning that he was going to give them their daily wage. And then I think just like most disappointments in life, our expectations changed. So, yeah, it was just interesting to hear this. And then also it was very interesting, I was kind of thinking about being one of the disciples and how I would have heard this after after Jesus saying to Peter, and then you might have even heard rumblings of James and John talking about, like these conversations don't come out of nowhere. So, in the very next passage, James and John ask about sitting at the right and the left. So I could even imagine some of these kind of conversations happening, and then Jesus telling this parable to kind of squash some of those conversations, but then they come up anyways. I don't know, what was something that struck you on?
Oh, I was thinking about the landowner, and was wondering just maybe what he was thinking inside of his head. And I think I could have easily become defensive and try to justify why I chose the way that I did, and then realizing that that wasn't his approach, and that's not how he dealt with it. And he was very generous with his money and his resources, and I think I can also relate to maybe feeling misunderstood for the decisions that I'm making, and maybe a lack of trust for maybe what other people saw of me, and a judgmental for maybe how I wanted to spend my money.
Yeah, they questioned him. When people question us, or these laborers question him, and he stood strong, right? He didn't change what he said. He did kind of give him an explanation, but he kind of gave it back to them. Like, are you upset with me? You agreed with this wage. Are you mad that I'm generous? Because I didn't give you less than we agreed upon. Mm-hmm. You just had different expectations, and I'm not living by your expectations. I'm living by my expectations, which are different than yours.
Mm-hmm. And it's something that they had already set out ahead of time. So it's not that he was treating them any worse than he said he was going to. So, yeah, I just think it's interesting how it almost seemed like he was going back on his word. That might not be the right phrase, but he held to what he said he was going to do.
Could you imagine being any of the disciples listening to this parable, possibly starting to talk about, or even maybe you're one of the disciples that had heard some of the grumblings of the other disciples? I can imagine hearing some of the conversations. Peter's asking Jesus conversations, but then also clearly kind of James and John are having this conversation. And I can imagine being one of the other disciples and thinking, oh, good, Jesus is kind of telling them, he's kind of giving them the business a little bit, and he's kind of affirming what I'm thinking, or I don't know. Can you imagine being one of the disciples? Did that pop up to you at all, or no?
No.
It's okay if it didn't. Yeah, good.
No. I think I was also thinking about what the other people were thinking, or maybe their situations, the one that came in later in on the day. Maybe something happened in their family, or maybe there was, I don't know, some kind of traumatic event that happened that they couldn't get there earlier, and they needed that wage for the whole day, and what a gift that it was that he was able to give that for the whole day. And also maybe they had some kind of physical ailment, and that they didn't come right up to him and say, like, will you hire me? But I think it was interesting. It just seemed like they were pretty passive about it, where they didn't approach him where he approached them and said, "Why are you just here, not doing anything?" So I found that interesting that they kind of came across as as a little more kind of just waiting for someone to give them a job, but they don't really seem to be doing anything about it. But yet, through all that, he still blessed them immensely and gave them the same salary that that the first people in line got as well.
Yeah, I too thought about those people, and the first thought is they seem kind of lazy, possibly. They weren't looking for a job, and the landowner even kind of chastises them, like, why are you guys just sitting around? I've came here 3 times already now. I think this is the 4th time or the 5th time, and you guys are still standing around. Like, I could have gave you work a long time ago, and there seems to be possibly, this laziness, and I can certainly see myself having this laziness. But then sometimes that, in our culture, we don't want to give those people a full day's wage, because then they're going to take advantage of us. They're going to use it against us, and they're going to try to do that every day. But I kind of felt the opposite. I imagine being one of those workers and being lazy or coming late for whatever circumstances, but then this generous landowner gives me a full day's wage that I clearly didn't deserve. I mean, they come at 5 and they barely even worked. And I guess in me there was a sense of, I really want to work for this guy, actually. Like, he sounds pretty generous. He gave me a full day's wage that I didn't deserve. And I guess there was kind of a sense of lifting up of my being, and like, I don't really want to be lazy anymore. This guy's kind of inspiring me in some ways. Like, he gave me a full day's wage, and I clearly didn't deserve it. Wow, there's really good people out here. I want to work, and not just like in general. I kind of want to work for this guy. Like, I want to work for him in particular.
I'm wondering too if the people that worked all day were thinking something like, well, if they got a full day's wage at 5, then maybe tomorrow I'll show up at 5 and I can get the same wage. I wonder if he's going to continue to be that way, or if this is just like a one-time deal.
Yeah. So now the second time through, we're going to really engage our imagination and kind of pick one of the characters. So give them a backstory, like kind of we've already been saying, possible backstories. Allow yourself to enter into that character. Maybe it's something that you're struggling with, or something that it resonated with you a little bit. You felt like, earlier today I meditated on this, and I picked the guys that came late, because I think sometimes I think I'm the person that comes early, but I'm probably not. And what does it feel like to be the person that comes late, or is lazy, or is just kind of late to the game for whatever reason? And it really resonated with me, and I think it kind of gave me a little bit of mercy and compassion for that situation. So take some time. If you need to push pause, that's fine. We're not going to pause on air to give you lots of time to pick that person, but try to give them a little bit of a backstory and how you're feeling, what's going on, and then fully enter into this story. And then we're going to try to, relate it. Like, what does this mean for me? What does it feel like to enter into this? What does this mean for my life with Jesus? What is he trying to say to me? The Holy Spirit is moving us with a lot of these things that inspire us. Remember, we're trying to find that friend on the street. and rest with him, rest with Jesus. So the thing that strikes you, we can rest with, and we don't need to move on from there. And we'll take that to prayer this week. So take a moment to pick that person, give them a story, and then we'll enter into it. Jesus told his disciples this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with them for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Going out about 9 o'clock, the landowner saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You too go into my vineyard, and I will give you what is just." So they went off. And he went out again at noon, and around 3 o'clock, and did likewise. Going out about 5 o'clock, the landowner found others standing around, and he said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They answered, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You too go into my vineyard." When it was evening, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Summon the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and ending with the first." When those who had started about 5 o'clock came, each received the usual daily wage. So when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also got the usual wage. And on receiving it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones worked only 1 hour, and you had made them equal to us, who bore the day's burden, and the heat." He said to one of them in reply, "My friend, I am not cheating you. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give this last one the same as you? Or am I not free to do as I wish with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous? Thus the last will be first, and the first will be last." So, if you're in a group, you can take a moment to let this kind of wash over you. What are some of the feelings that you have as you picked one of those characters? And you can say who you picked. Maybe even give a brief backstory of what it was like to enter into this. And then as the story progressed, how did you feel? What happened? What were some of the emotions or memories or things that was going on in your life? And then how did it feel to reflect that with Jesus? So the following thing, of course, every week is to take this further into our prayer the rest of the week, and for however long. Maybe one of these prayers you revisit every single week just because there's always something there and there's something that really struck you. So who was that person that you picked? And what happened? This is not a Bible study. There's no right or wrong with what happened, or how you felt, or how you're relating that to Jesus. Again, I picked, I was kind of in between being one of the disciples and being one of the people that came last, and I chose again to be one of the people that came last. And I don't know if I had much of a backstory other than I felt like there was just kind of life circumstances caused me or allowed me to be a little lazy or confused and kind of to come late to the marketplace and maybe not to catch when the landowner came the first 3 times. And then I worked for 1 hour thinking, well, I guess, it's better than nothing. And then feeling this immense gratitude when I got a full day's wage for 1 hour of work. I mean, I've worked, so one of the memories that brought up to me was picking rocks. I remember picking rocks all day as a kid and getting a very small wage. It was less than like $15 for a whole day, and maybe like some bologna sandwiches and some lemonade. And as I reflected on working 1 hour for this landowner, again, I felt this immense gratitude. And then I also kind of saw that these other guys were kind of upset. And I observed the landowner talking to them and saying, is it, am I not okay being generous? Are you not okay with that? I didn't cheat you. I just chose to be generous with these people. And I think also in my own prayer life, or just my own life, I feel very loved by the Father saying to me, just come be with me. Late, early, I don't care. There's no judgment. Just come be with me. So as I received that full day's wage, I just felt the love of the landowner, and I certainly had a sense of just wanting to be with him and work for him and kind of like give my life to him because he's so generous. I just felt really cared for and understood that whatever happened earlier in the day, he didn't care. He just wanted you to come work because it's good for you. So that's kind of how I was feeling. Honey, who did you pick? Did you have a story? How did it feel to go through that?
Oh, I have a lot of things in my mind. One of the things in particular was I was seeing myself as the workers who had worked all day, and felt upset or felt envious of those that had just gotten there, and it just reminded me of just a few different scenarios of I know that even just in the workforce right now, the people coming straight out of college are getting a significantly more amount of money than I did coming out of college, and there seems to be some envy there, in thinking that they didn't have to work as hard to get to that position, but then just recognizing that this is just a different scenario than it was when I was just getting out of school, and then also reminded of it's kind of hard to figure out how to say this. My daughter Teresa is 5, and she the last 2 weeks has been saying that things aren't fair, that it's not fair for her that we choose that we're making decisions, whether it be her needing to go to bed on time or taking a bath or just regular things, saying it's not fair. So I think that in that scenario, I can put myself in the place of the landowner, and helping Teresa as a parent, helping her recognize the I don't know the word, when it says, "Are you envious because I'm generous?" Just the what she is receiving is I don't know how to say it. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm hoping you can cut that out.
No, I don't edit this. That's okay. So, what were some of the things that you what were any emotions that you felt? Was there gratitude, or were you upset? What were some of the things that you want to relate to the Lord, I think, this week? Because you mentioned some things about, life stuff. And then, so one of the reasons we do this podcast is so that we can continue in our prayer life to lift up our hearts and our minds. So some of those things that struck us or that stuck out to us or we have memories of, what are some of those things you want to relate to the Lord this week? Or what are some of the things that you want to dive into a little bit deeper? Do you have anything you want to dive into deeper this week from your reflections?
Oh, I think for me, probably just recognizing the generosity of the Lord and how He is generous, even just in the little things that maybe sometimes seems, from my perspective, is just I may just see like a small portion of it, but how His generosity is beyond all bounds, and to step out of wherever, whatever zone I'm in at the moment, and recognizing how in every circumstance, that the Lord is loving us, and He can do that through our own suffering or through any frustration that we may have if we feel mistreated or whatever, and that He continues to love us through that.
I think one of the things that I think I'm going to revisit being, contemplating being one of the people that came late, and to just dive deeper into that. How does that feel when the landowner or the Lord, gives me that full wage? What does it feel like? How do I receive it? And then kind of what does that lead to in some ways? What does that lead to in my own prayer life, in my own work? I encourage any of you to dive further deep into, maybe you were one of the disciples that was bickering about being first or last, or wanting a place in heaven. Or maybe you're working for the church and you're thinking about, I'm doing all this work for Him. I listened to a wonderful podcast with John Eldridge yesterday on my bike ride, and he talked about this. A lot of times people that work for the church or on a mission can substitute working for Jesus with, not having that deep relationship with Him, because you're always doing stuff for Him instead of receiving from Him. So, that was one of those things as well, is, the disciples are talking about this. We're giving our life for this. What type of reward are we getting? And to think about that. What is the Lord saying to me when that rises up in my heart? When I'm thinking I'm missing out on something that someone else is getting? Or what rises up in our heart when we feel like maybe we were the people that came late? Maybe we're a little older and we didn't have faith. And what does that feel like as well? I think one of the beautiful things I didn't feel was I didn't feel shame in coming late. And I think sometimes that happens in our own lives, that for whatever reason, we've walked away from the faith, and the Lord doesn't shame us in coming back. In fact, He is incredibly generous with us. So I encourage you to continue that conversation with the Lord. This coming out Wednesday morning, so if you want to listen to it and then revisit it throughout the week, have an opportunity to listen to it as a family. As you can see, this is not something that you need to be a scripture scholar from. I'm very happy that my wife was able to join us and give some of her thoughts, maybe some of just her personal thoughts, but maybe a little bit of the feminine voice to this podcast as well. So I'm very thankful for that, and I hope it gives you some encouragement and some fruit for you to live your prayer life. If you found some fruit in this podcast, I encourage you to share it with others and grow it so that people can have a better prayer life, so that we can lift up our hearts, so that we can live free and give our lives more fully to Him. I will see you next week. God bless.